Hi, it's Heather Boyd with Nurture Squared, and today I get to sit with Lynne Newman, occupational therapist from Toronto, for the next half hour. We're going to chat about a lot of things today, but I wanted to give you a little background of who Lynne is and what area of practice she's in. Now, she's an occupational therapist, and I first connected with her when I was starting my private practice, and I knew I wanted to do things a little less conventionally than most OTs. And so I went browsing around the web and I found Lynne, who was already doing things a little less conventionally. So she actually walked me through early on in my journey in private practice. But to give you a full scope of what she does, she is an OT who does online and in-person consults, but she focuses a lot on honoring motherhood and honoring our own personal journeys. But in addition to that work, she's also got workshops and support for empaths and for parents who are raising sensitive children and who may also be sensitive themselves. She also, I got to know her quite well a year ago when she ran a retreat in Muskoka for exploring motherhood and her own personal stories, which was very powerful. But in addition to that, she's a birth doula, a Reiki practitioner, and teaches simplicity parenting. She also has a Gray Mothering Collective group that explores the light and dark sides of mothering and parenting and the journeys that we take through that. And most recently, she's running an online retreat for women called Come to the Fire, Journey into Stillness, that is going to be in the fall, a full retreat in Guatemala. So Lynne, thank you for joining us today. I wonder if you could fill us in on anything I missed, or maybe fill us in a little bit on where you're at right now with your practice.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're going to talk about it. I think it's a journey, really. And I think I'm going to start a membership called The Journey, because as a sensitive person, as, you know, someone who's combining all her skills and passions and professional and personal, trying to merge it all, like for me, that's what gray mothering is. It's not so much like, it's not a how-to, and it's not because, you know, we're all smart and it, you know, other people can coach on like the how-to if you want, but I have a passion for it's like exploring the dark and the light, and changing, you know, moving through our emotions and our trauma, and changing the stories on a much deeper and cellular level. So but all that to say, it's like it's been a process and a journey. I went through it from a personal perspective, and like it's something I kind of feel and know in my bones. And now it's evolving. I had the spark, you know, I think 5 years ago, and I used to have shame around like, oh my God, it's taking me 5 years. Like just this week, I was like, okay, it's time. And I created like the website for Gray. It's going to be like separate from anyway, but all that to say, it's just, it's a process. So.
Well, speaking of the process, because I know, with this whole journey and the ups and downs of private practice and the insecurity on multiple levels that comes from having a private practice after working a more conventional job, the learning curve is huge. And I see it even just as you talk about how, the messages that you send out into the world to try to find the people for whom your skills are a good fit. And something like, even just the decision around whether to start a new website for a particular aspect of your business is stuff that we never learned in OT school. And certainly most of us in private practice, our skills are elsewhere. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that whole, the reaching out and making your message clear, or even understanding the message that you want to make, because even that takes a long time to develop.
Yeah. So at the root of it, I mean, for me, what's kind of what I have an interest in is like, for those of us, and probably those who are listening, it's, perhaps like you have your own healing journey, maybe that you've gone on. And so you have like the professional training, and then it's like, especially if you're passionate or you want to share your story, but also serve from a place of, giving, because you kind of know it a little bit. Do you know what I mean? That is a spiritual journey. Like all of it is a spiritual, motherhood is a spiritual journey, being like your life is a spiritual journey. So really, I think that for me is like the through thread, the thread that connects it all. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but the thing for me that I've had challenge, and I know I'm not alone in this, is the being visible part. Like, and like the fear of maybe failing, or the fear of actually never doing it. Or yeah, there's a lot of things that can come up. So that's what I love. And that, I'm working through it, and I have for forever. Since I was young, I had like 18, I had a spiritual mentor, so helping me. And that's like my work. I love it. And I need help maybe in business strategy. That's not how I support people, but I also, support people with I don't know, I feel like I'm rambling, but finding the message, it takes a lot of courage, right? To listen, have those nudges, to pay attention, and then also to move through the fear. Like the fear will always be there, but just how to outweigh it with like faith and courage and trust and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you talk, Lynn, about that fear of failure, like you don't want to get out there and be seen because of the fear of failure. And yet there's also the fear of actually getting out there, almost a fear of success. And so we're stuck between these two big rocks. And yet if we dig deep and listen to what's our passion and what's our mission, so that we can walk through those two rocks into getting to share our message and share our what's the word? Expertise, I guess, or share the skills that we have to help support families.
Yeah. And like show up the way authentically, so whatever that is, some people may not struggle with that. But I think it I don't know. Can you relate?
I can relate.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. And which is almost like it's dichotomous, right? It's like two separate sides that seem like they wouldn't be happening at the same time. And yet I think a lot of us, Nurture Squared came out of that. And I think it's why people are even here, is we are stuck between those two difficult places. And yet.
So there's a tension. Mm-hmm.
Yes, the tension. Yes.
And the bridge, like there's definitely a bridge. So I for me, like for Gray, and it's again, I this is my own stuff. Like it's not about mothering per se. Like we've all come from mothers, and we all need to mother ourselves, so to speak. But it's so much deeper, because it's like we judge our experiences, or we might judge where we're at, or we compare, right? That's like it's not black and white kind of thing. And then when you move away from judgment, it's honoring the dark and the light, and then that gray space is the in between, which is where there's possibilities, right? Mm-hmm. There's, you can choose. And when you can't choose, you choose how you respond. And there's always a way, so yeah.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. And I think, again, that's where Nurture Squared resonated so much with me, in terms of this journey to figure out how to get our passion out there and to connect with people and to be seen without feeling like we're stripping ourselves bare to be seen.
Yes.
Now, I know you got a sneak peek at our last interview with Stacey Maskell, and one of the things that she had said that resonated with you is this idea of when we're telling our own story to connect with people, that the goal or the perspective can be to speak through our scar, not through our wound. Mm-hmm. Now, I know, we've all had journeys, and there have been some difficult journeys. And I wonder if you could speak to that way of thinking, or how that resonates with you in terms of how that brings you forward with your work with people.
Yeah. So this is a very gray, tricky thing, right? And I think it is a process and a journey of figuring that out. And so when it's like there's no right or wrong, but it's not to like let yourself off the hook. But I feel like as a person myself, when I feel pressure or the shame, like I don't excel in that, like I don't thrive. So when I decrease the pressure and be like, okay, I can't mess this up, and I also want to be aligned. And what is my intention with sharing? And so the filter through that too is like, when you're looking for a specific response, when if someone's, and maybe through Facebook or social media, you've probably experienced that, when you might get disappointed if someone says something, or they start giving you advice and you're like, fuck, I didn't want advice. I was like helping, I was trying to like help or whatever it is. Or I shouldn't be swearing if there's kids around. But that's when you know you're sharing maybe where it's not completely healed. And that's okay too, right? There is a difference, and we know that, I don't know how to explain it, but when there's more of a detachment from like what people will say and how they'll respond. But it's not to say that you won't get triggered or but then you have a place to go to process that. So whether it's in your journal or your meditation, or you have a leader, like a mentor or a coach or a therapist, what have you, like that's where you go and actually process your emotions around it. I don't know. Yeah. Does that?
Yeah. Well, and it speaks to the idea that we're all on our own journeys, that we are imperfect people in an imperfect world trying to support people through their own journey. And whether that journey is through Reiki or whether it's through social work or helping someone through a birth, it still speaks to the journey and the human experience and how gray it is. There is no black and white, as you say, and that gray collective that you have around the idea that there is no right or wrong. There's figuring it out as we go along.
And that's big. And it's not to judge ourselves if we think, oh my God, we still judge, because that's going to happen, right? Like that's the thing. But it's really beautiful when you can create space and an awareness around noticing. I was just going to say something. Oh, and about the wounds and the scars, like we're going to walk around with wounds, and not all our wounds, some of them have healed over, and sometimes they'll get scratched. And it's not to say that you can't put your work out there until like all your wounds are like great, so, but there is a filter, and I'm sure, people can tune into like, okay, what is my intention around this? Am I looking for approval, or and we might still post and want some of that, but the goal really is to be sort of like grounded, like sit up straight, more rooted in what you're sharing. Like there's no attachment to it, but that's a big thing. It's easier said than done, for sure. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's always easier.
And it's possible too, with, some support and help and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, and I know, I want to come back to this idea of resonating with ourselves and resonating with and being seen by others, but maybe we can back up a little bit and talk a little about how you started in private practice and where did you come from before that, and what made you leap into private practice?
Well, so this is the perfect example of, sharing from our stories, the power of story, and then also from wounds to scars. So I was an OT in pediatrics, or Em was, and I burnt out. I had fertility issues. I had losses. I was juggling, it was like a part-time job trying to take care of myself so I could have a baby. Then I got pregnant, and my husband was diagnosed with cancer. So the whole time that I was working, I was also supporting him. So a whole bunch of stuff happened, right? Like, so everyone at some point in your life, like the shit, like the floor falls up from underneath you. And I felt like I was like hanging by a piece of thread. So from that place, I learned how to say no. I learned to set boundaries. I learned to let go of what people thought. I learned a lot in terms of also how I wanted to show up and like serve. And I also needed to move away from sort of traditional work. I had felt like I had outgrown it because I wanted to work in the way that felt resonant with me. And I also needed time to focus on my own healing, even though that was so edgy for me because we needed the money. My husband, was on disability and has been, like, he's been still alive, even though it's stage 4 melanoma. And so money was a big thing. But I feel like so from that place. And then I had Stella, who was, we're navigating, and she is really highly sensitive, just like me. So at like 2.5, when her dad found out his cancer had spread to his pancreas, like she could, and kids are so attuned, they feel it. And I remember taking her to the sick kids anxiety clinic, being like, what the, like, what's wrong, but like, help me, this is really tough. And they didn't really help. And just the more that I went along with it, I just saw that, found out about highly sensitive being a temperament trait, and it just connected the dots. And then I thought, this is in part what I want to help create a service, because it is a gray area. It's Stella doesn't have, or many families that I support, the kids don't have a diagnosis per se. They're not on the spectrum. They're not, right. And it also takes more patience and skill to, especially when you're highly sensitive, I feel, and I like to dig deeper. So there's the practical stuff, but there's also like the stories and shame that we might have gone through growing up, right? And so how that triggers us, or triggered me as a mother, and then also dealing with so much grief and loss and unknown. So there's a lot there. I'm still figuring out how to communicate and like share everything but because there's a lot of depth to it, but yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and you know what, it keeps coming up over and over again, and it's highlighted in your story too, Lynn, and Stacy's last week, and other interviews we've done in my own story, is that, and as frustrating as it is, the learning, the real learning always comes from the hardest parts, the hardest places that we have to walk through to get to the other side, or to keep walking through long term. And, you know, in hearing you talk, it's a reinforcement that there is no shortcut to this learning. We can't learn it through someone else's experience. No matter how many stories we hear, we can only learn it through our own experience. And it's painful and difficult and overwhelming.
Yeah, and how to transform that pain. But the thing is, and only you can do it. And that's what I totally believe, right? It's like, you know, you're the wisest, like, and also, I know I'm like so beating this down, but the gray is like the wisdom, like you have your own wisdom, innate wisdom within. I really believe that. And so do our kids. And so, but and I needed a lot of support. I mean, I used to cry over how much support I needed. And I just want to normalize that and share, because you know, whether it's in entrepreneurship or a health challenge or life, marriage, whatever, parenting, it's definitely okay. And sometimes, you know, we just need people to reflect back and to be on the journey with us partway or whatever. And have people rooting for us, because I remember, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that whole idea of support, you know, I think when we think about entrepreneurial practice, or at least I did at the beginning, it was concrete skills, like things that I was going to do, even though it wasn't direct therapy, it was still mediator model. And the more I practiced, the longer I realized it's the support piece that ends up being the real work that families do. That, you know, again, I can't do it for them, but the real aha moments aren't always, and I won't even say aren't most of the time, when I've given some trick that makes life easier. Those tricks are great. They could be immensely helpful and get them through the day, but it's the harder work of feeling validated, understanding your story, and knowing how that's going to contribute to being a better parent or a better person, or feeling stronger inside.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, because I have a hard time, and I see big picture, and even though I definitely embody or want to, it's like the simplicity, but life is very complicated, right? Like there is the two sides to it. And I struggle with the like simple tips and tricks because there's so much depth to it. Like, yes, we can do a simple thing that might shift the energy or change in our businesses perhaps, or at home. Yes, right? Like there's things that we can do bit by bit. And there's also like, and so just, you're not alone if you're listening to this. I think that's why because I've felt some shame and like sadness around like, what the fuck? Like, how come everyone else is like, and the comparison is a huge trap of mine, like really, really big. I'm aware of it. So that's the thing now. Like I'm aware of it, and I can say, oh, okay, there it is. I might still like engage with it, but I can snap out of it pretty fast. Like, okay. Is that true? No. Is it helpful to me? No. Is it necessary? You know, is it kind? These are principles we talk about in Simplicity. Simplicity Parenting book by Kim Jong-Payne is really lovely for that. But yeah.
Well, and you know, the one piece I wanted to pick up from what you were saying too, is you were talking about connecting on a deeper level with people, but people are looking or think they want or think they know that they're looking for a specific thing, a specific skill set, or a specific strategy that's going to make it easier. I wonder if you can talk a little bit to that, because I think you've effectively bridged that to where people come to you. Like,
oh, do you think that? Yeah.
And maybe
I don't
not.
know. I know, I'm still figuring that out too. And that's the thing. It is a process, because your message and your offerings will shift with what you, and as you do it. I think that's like a big universal law too, is like that law of taking action, which, you know, for me, it's like steady and baby steps, which is okay, right? To stretch your comfort zone. But that is marketing or being of service or informing. I mean, that's not, I feel like it's not a strength, but it's something that has to, like, how to communicate, right? Like all that stuff, like the formula, like not formulas, but there isn't a formula. But if you can just connect authentically with maybe what people are wanting, there's a lot to it, right? It's like the problem and then how to get to what they want. I have a hard time with all that stuff.
You know, it is, I think that's one of the most challenging pieces of entrepreneurship in the helping professions, is that people want a certain thing and we can provide a little bit of that for them, but there's so much more. They just won't listen to the more until they're there and they can see that that's something that's going to help them. And what's challenging is being authentic and getting that across without feeling like we're marketing something that isn't really where our hearts are at. Like, we could do this piece for you, but if you could see on the other side that there's like the sun rising on the other side, if you could just walk over the hill with me and see.
Yeah, totally. I hear you. Yeah.
I think you've talked a lot about that comparison piece too. And I know one of the themes that keeps coming up this week for me when I'm reading is, imposter syndrome and feeling less adequate. Mm-hmm. I think that is one of the challenging things of solo practice, because when we're part of a team, there's somehow this synergistic energy that comes from working with others on a team that we fit in on, and where our skills are a good fit, and where our goals and our vision is the same. But when we're solo practitioners, we're kind of, we're chief cook and bottle washer and marketer, and trying to figure out our message, while at the same time healing our own wounds, supporting the growth of our own kids. And I mean, it just gets crazy.
Oh, it's overwhelming. Yeah. And I don't know what to say to that.
I think there's just no answer to that. I think other than, part of getting together with you today and with just gathering with others that are in Nurture Squared, is being able to walk through that piece. Because I think, our inability to answer that is because there is no answer. It's walking through that journey, right?
Yeah. And I think trust is a big part of it. Trusting the process, and then also being okay with, it's also figuring out, like, discerning what it is that we need, or that you need, or that I spent quite a few years ago. I was volunteering for like some project. It was like I was volunteering, met this woman, and we connected, then jumped on the phone. I had no intention of she ended up being like a high level, like, business coach, and sold me, or I was sold to, because she used these tactics of like, well, I don't have the money, which is true. Like, we were on disability, or he's on disability, and I had 2 mat leaves and like all that stuff. Right. And it wasn't a priority. It was like $6,000. And, she's like, if you needed life-saving surgery, where would you find the money? And like, I ended up giving away my power, because I felt I didn't have the strength or the groundedness to say, you know what? No. Like, and since then it feels so good. Like, I had a functional medicine practitioner, like, appointment like a couple years ago, and he's tried the same thing, like, from a kind place, but just like, if you saw this as a priority, you would spend the money. And it was like a few $1,000s. And I'm like, literally, like, this is a theme, like, we've spent over 6 figures in like alternative treatments to keep him alive. I've invested in myself. Like, it's a lot. Can I just anyway? And he said, if you really saw this, like as you were worth it, then you would spend it. And I later wrote an email. I said, look, that hurts. Like the way that you say, it doesn't mean, like, people can legitimately not have access to resources that they need. So don't make it into like a worthiness. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling, but the high level coaching, which she taught me was, I didn't even finish the program. Like, I just did not resonate with her strategies or approach. And so where I was going with this is that just be mindful of when you join a course or do a program, the resonance. So like, is it fear-based? Is it fear of missing out? Is that why you're joining? Or are you really called and like maybe you're resisting because you're kind of scared? It's scary to like, you know, stretch yourself out of your comfort zone. Like that's a little bit different, you know what I mean? And your own personal experiences. And even if you do work with someone that you have a fit with, it can help you work through that stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And you know, it's funny that you should be speaking on that because a lot of my searches and a lot of my posts are through Nurture Squared. So they're about marketing and they're about entrepreneurship. The number of ads that I get around marketing strategies, and I'm starting to see a pattern in how the whole thing runs. And I think, you know, the allure or the fear of it being a limited offer or your only chance, and, you know, the coveted idea of having a life of balance or being able to get your message across. And I think I'm seeing the formula now. I think, well, how do I take that and make sure that I'm still being authentic and don't kind of slip down a muddy slope into a formulaic thing too, which goes back to that idea of just speaking from the heart and being authentic, even through the imperfections, even through the, you know, the missteps. That I think if we're speaking our truth and we're there in the right place, like our heart's in the right place in terms of what our goals are and what our vision is for clients, then I think we're far less vulnerable with lessons learned along the way and money dropped on courses or coaches that aren't a good fit, but far less vulnerable.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, and there is psychology behind, you know, setting limitations and all of that, which is, it's not necessarily bad. It's just, what's your intent around it? Are you being honest? And is it really that you have, like, I think there's a lot of, anyway, the way that I want to practice is like from a real place, that like if I say there's 3 spots left, that's only to say it because if you want it, then just know, right?
Yeah,
it's not
really
to like,
it's not a contrived shortage. It's like there really is, I'm accepting this much. It's not a contrived formula that you're working from.
Yeah. And even just like it, knowing, you know, when I started doing the simplicity groups, you know, I had a few people join, it takes time. And I remember Lindsay Para, who's my mentor at the time, was just kind of like, just give it at least 7 offer it 7 times. Like you have to get a sort of rhythm and exposure to it. And then, right, do you know what I mean? And then the practice and the confidence as well. And you learn from it too. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, I know Lindsay Para as of this week because of my involvement in your Journey to Stillness online retreat. I was going to say resort, but retreat. The one last thing, and I know we're almost out of time, but I know, you know, in this personal vision to practice in a way that resonates deeply with you, there's still that ebb and flow and flexibility needed for exploring conventional employment balanced out with raising a family and private practice. And I wonder, in closing, or as our last question, whether you could speak to that shift, you know, as you've experienced it over the last little bit, especially most recently, and how that fits into how to stay true to yourself and still give your family what you need.
Yeah. So Mark, my husband, his cancer has been stable the last couple of years. So while he was in treatment, was like a big conversation. He thought he was going to die, so he didn't necessarily see the future. But when things started to stabilize, it was like, okay, what kind of life do we want? We know we want flexibility. And so you start big picture. He started taking courses to become a real estate agent. So then last year I started weaning out pediatric like visits or setting a boundary to the East End. Now I'm not really doing, because I really love like the online mentoring and stuff in groups. All that to say, there's a shift, right? Like things did slow down this past winter, and there's a need for, because we're both now self-employed, for a little bit of consistent income. So I had to, against my will, I chose to get a job. But it's because for years I was like, oh my God, I cannot go back. I feel like it would be like selling my soul kind of thing. And I know I'm not alone. I've talked to many other OTs, and it's not that I love OT, the paradigm and the profession. It's just when you get a taste, I've been out on my own for like a decade, like having the flexibility and not doing my own thing, but my own thing for the last 5 years. And last year I doubled, my income, and things were good. And I also know, so again, there can be a lot of shame, like what the heck, like things slow down. But as you open up and you don't take it personal, right? And you hear other people being like, yeah, there's something, like I know from astrology and all that, there's a little bit of a shift, even though that's not true for everybody, but people have noticed a little bit of a slowdown. So, the juggle. Yeah, I had to do a little bit of reframe. This is short term, and also this is a means to an end. Like it's okay to do what you have to do, and it's part-time. There's benefits. Yeah, so we've had to figure it out, right? Because he needs a car. He works even, but
yeah.
Well,
and I think, Lynne, that it really speaks to the idea that the journey it doesn't have to be, but it absolutely can't be linear. It's just not. Yeah. And that if we close ourselves off to the flexibility of making different choices and having different options as different situations come up, if we close ourselves off to that, we miss the opportunity to have a slightly different path than we expected, but still that end point of what we're leaning towards or working towards.
Yeah, because ultimately, he could have gone back to his career job that he hadn't been in 10 years, like working for pharmaceuticals, which didn't light him up. And we know from experience, life is short. It also really matters to have, on some level, something that excites you, right? That you have passion. And to have the flexibility. That's what we wanted, what's really important for us. So that takes a lot of courage and to hold that vision, right? And eventually things will be back on track and be okay that way financially, right? So yeah. And things are okay and secure and everything. It's just,
well, I'm glad for you to share that with us, because especially since, and I say this personally, that, having only been in private practice for a year, I think the word patience and, is the big word for me, that patience in getting things going, and that it's okay to look at other options to make it fit. But as long as we still stay true to what really resonates with us, so we can be open to that when it comes along.
Yeah, or like figure out, and I know it's been a half hour, but like, because we don't want to be like desperate or needy, right? Like I need to do, because that energy also is a little bit not, people feel that. So, we Airbnb'd for a couple summers to like supplement, like, because I was like, I don't want to go get a job, or like, how can we travel, be able to go camp and do the things that we do, but have it kind of be paid for, or, so thinking outside the box, people are resourceful as you can, figure it out. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Lynne, I know we've reached the half hour, probably gone over a little bit, but I want to thank you for spending this last half hour. It's always nice to talk with you, and especially nice to get this one-on-one like this. Where can people find you if they're wanting to look you up?
So yeah, talk about the gray. I'm in flux with my website. Trying to like work on things. Yeah. So lynnenewman.com, and then eventually the Gray Mothering is coming out too. But
that's Lynne, Lynnne, Newman, Newman.
Yeah, and I have that free Gray Mothering Facebook group too, if people.
Right. Yeah. And Gray is Grey. I always have to double check that when I look at it.
Right. I forget. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Lynne. I appreciate it, and have a great day.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.